My family betrayed me, but I learned to heal and forgive. This is the story of how the family I always considered my refuge became the epicenter of my greatest injustice. For years, I lived unaware of the hidden sacrifices, secrets, and betrayals being woven around me. It all started when I was 20 years old, and though I didn't know it at the time, the decisions of my family would begin to change my life forever. Over the following decade, I discovered that sacrifice is not always recognized, and that family bonds can be more complicated and damaging than we imagine. This is my story, one of betrayal, struggle, pain, and, ultimately, reconciliation. It all began in 2005, when I was just 17 years old. My family had always been my anchor. I grew up with a single mother who, despite all the hardships, always tried to give us the best. My two siblings and I shared a special bond, and our life, though modest, was filled with love. My mother, despite her sacrifices, never complained. She was the pillar of our home, and she always taught me to value effort and dedication. My relationship with my siblings, particularly with my older sister, was the closest. We were inseparable, always sharing our dreams and aspirations. But as we grew older, things began to change. My mother, exhausted from working non-stop, started to suffer from depression. Although she never fully showed it, I could sense that her strength was fading, and this started to affect the family dynamic. I, being the youngest, felt responsible for helping in any way I could. In 2008, when I was 20 years old, everything took an unexpected turn. My sister, who had been working in a local store, decided to move to another state to seek better opportunities. It wasn't a surprise, but the way she did it was. She never consulted me or our mom. One day, she just packed up and left. There was no formal goodbye. The relationship began to fracture, and although I understood she wanted to improve her life, I felt like she was leaving me behind. It was at this point that I began to notice something strange. My mother, increasingly overwhelmed by her depression, stopped making important decisions for herself. I took on the role of the family leader, which, at 20, was a huge responsibility. My older brother was also absent, preoccupied with his own world. I found myself alone, trying to keep the family together while my mother, who had always been the nucleus, was slowly falling apart. What I didn't know at the time was that this was only the beginning. What seemed like a normal transition in my siblings' lives would become the foundation of the great family injustice that was to come. My sacrifice, for the well-being of my mother, wouldn't be reflected the way I hoped by those I loved most. After my sister moved away, things at home worsened. My mother could no longer manage the household expenses and daily routine on her own. I had to find a full-time job to cover the family's needs. It was a modest job at an electronics store, but it was enough to pay the bills and give my mother something to live on. Meanwhile, my older brother, who was 28 at the time, was still doing little for the family. Even though he had finished college, he preferred to live a socially active life and didn't involve himself in family problems. The worst part was that, whenever I asked for help, he simply wouldn't respond. My mother, too, was not in the best condition to ask him for support. The silence of the family surrounded me, and I felt more and more trapped in the responsibility I had taken on unwillingly. In 2010, a year after my sister had moved, I realized that my mother's life was being devastated by her depression. Despite being exhausted, I tried to comfort her, but the burden was too much for me. That's when the injustice began to take shape. My sister, though she no longer lived with us, continued to send small amounts of money, but it was never enough to cover what was really needed. My brother didn't even bother to ask how my mother was doing or if we needed help. I felt alone in the struggle, but the worst part was that, deep down, it hurt to know that my own siblings, who shared the same family roots as me, seemed to have forgotten everything my mother had done for us. Amid this anguish, I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. I talked to my mother about the need to seek professional help, but she refused, fearing that others would notice her suffering. The weight of all this became unbearable. My mother isolated herself more and more, and although I tried everything to keep us afloat, I felt helpless. The family's burden was falling on my shoulders, while my siblings seemed to live their lives unaffected by our situation. Although my life was filled with sacrifices, it still had some hope. However, in 2011, everything changed. One day, I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. While reviewing the family accounts, I found a significant payment my mother had made to an unknown account. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but after investigating further, I discovered that my older brother had been sending money regularly to that account. It seemed to be part of an agreement I had never been told about. Why hadn't he told me? Why was he hiding this information? I confronted my mother, and after much insistence, she confessed that my brother had started secretly helping her by sending money under the pretense that it was for her well-being. What surprised me the most was that, when my mother asked him to tell me, he always said it wasn't necessary. He decided that I shouldn't worry. But in reality, he was taking advantage of my dedication for his own benefit. My mother, although she understood the injustice, was so emotionally affected that she couldn't see clearly. My brother was taking advantage of the situation, hiding his support while I continued to sacrifice myself for everyone without receiving anything in return. The pain of knowing that my own brother was doing this behind my back was a deep betrayal. I felt that all the effort I had put into my family was not only being ignored but was also being manipulated by those I loved most. By the end of 2013, I decided it was time to confront my brother directly. After months of enduring his indifference, I asked for a meeting. I wanted to talk to him face to face, with no intermediaries or excuses. The meeting was tense from the start. I told him everything I had discovered: the money, the concealment of the information, the fact that he was neglecting everything, while I was assuming responsibilities that weren't mine. My brother, instead of apologizing, tried to justify his behavior. He said that, in his opinion, my mother didn't need to know everything, and that the money was just a way of protecting me so I wouldn't worry. For him, his behavior was a favor, a way of keeping me away from the family problems. But what he didn't understand was that by hiding his help, he only deepened the wound. I felt lonelier than ever, trapped in a lie he had woven. The confrontation ended in a stalemate. There was no reconciliation, just empty words and promises that were never fulfilled. I realized that my brother would never understand what family sacrifice meant. The worst part was that my mother, in her desire to protect us, tried to mediate, but her efforts only made things worse. The division between the three of us became more evident, and although I tried to move on, the pain remained ever present. The confrontation with my brother in 2013 left me more devastated than I had imagined. Although on the outside we were still a family, inside I felt that everything had broken irreparably. Distrust grew like a cancer, slowly devouring the remaining bonds between us. My mother, who had been the emotional support for everyone, could no longer hold me up. She seemed to have forgotten all that I had done for her, and I, at the same time, felt drained from the burden I carried. In 2014, I tried to focus on my work and my personal life. However, the division in the family remained a latent presence. My brother was still distant, and my mother, although trying to be more involved, was deeply affected by what had happened. She still preferred to avoid confrontation, and instead of acknowledging the damage that had been done, she tried to minimize it. I, on the other hand, could no longer ignore what had happened. The resentment accumulated each day. As the year progressed, I decided to try something I never thought I would: family therapy. I knew that I needed to heal personally, but I also needed to find a way to restore, even if partially, the relationship with my mother and brother. The idea of therapy was that we could sit down and talk openly, without resentments, and begin to heal the wounds. But, as usual, my brother was unwilling to participate. He showed indifference and said he didn't see the point in getting involved, which hurt even more. My mother, although initially showing some hope, soon became discouraged when she saw that my brother refused to help. And, although she tried to continue with the therapy sessions, I realized that, deep down, she no longer knew what to do. In the end, therapy didn't provide the relief I had hoped for, and my family continued walking in different directions. The distance between us only grew. In 2016, my mother suffered a severe emotional collapse after years of battling depression. The situation became so grave that she needed to be hospitalized. It was one of the most difficult moments of my life. I watched my mother lose herself in her own pain, and I felt powerless to help her as I had before. My mother's illness forced me to face a painful reality: the family I had worked so hard to keep together no longer existed. My mother, my brother, and I were complete strangers. My brother, despite being aware of the gravity of the situation, once again was absent. He made no effort to be there for my mother or for me. Although at times he tried to justify his behavior, his lack of action only made it clearer to me that he would never understand what it meant to be a family. For me, it was the final blow. All those years, I had put my mother and brother first, but they had never shown the same effort for me. And now, when I needed them most, I realized that I was completely alone. The pain of betrayal wasn't just emotional, it also affected me physically. Sleepless nights, constant tensions, and the stress of holding things together for my mother while everything was falling apart led to complete exhaustion. As my mother fought for her health, I fought to maintain my own emotional stability, but everything was becoming increasingly unsustainable. In 2017, after months of caring for my mother and working on her recovery, a revelation changed my perspective on everything I had experienced up to that point. During a conversation with my mother, she, almost unintentionally, let slip information she had never mentioned before. She confessed that, throughout all those years of sacrifice, my brother had always had his own plans. My mother told me that he had been saving money behind everyone's back, thinking about his own future and not the well-being of the family. The worst part of it all was that my mother had been allowing my brother to make decisions about the family finances, even though he had never shown any interest in anyone else's well-being but his own. When I heard this, I felt a mix of rage and pain. My brother had played with our family, taking advantage of the situation, and even worse, my mother, in her desire to protect him, had left us both in the dark about what was really happening. This discovery was the final straw. The family I had idealized for so many years crumbled before my eyes. The injustice I had endured didn't only come from my brother's actions, but also from my mother's passivity, which allowed things to go this far. That night, after talking to her, I made a decision: I could no longer sacrifice my life for people who didn't value me. With the pain of this revelation still fresh in my mind, I made the decision I never thought I would, to break away from my family. Not permanently, but in a way that would allow me to heal. I could no longer be the person who carried everything, who solved the problems without being considered. I knew I couldn't continue being the victim of such a destructive dynamic. I told my mother that I needed time for myself, to distance myself emotionally from everything that had happened. Although she didn't fully understand, I explained that I needed to recover, both physically and emotionally. It was a very difficult moment, as no matter how much I tried, I couldn't help but feel guilty. But deep down, I knew this was the only way to find some peace. My brother, on the other hand, had no interest in talking to me. His selfishness remained intact, and he didn't even give me a response. This only reaffirmed what I already knew: I would never be able to count on him the way I had hoped. Despite everything, I decided that my life couldn't continue to be defined by the injustice I had lived. My priority now was to heal and move forward, no matter what others thought. The following months were tough, but also full of self-discovery. I moved to a quieter place, away from the city, to escape the memories that tied me to my family. I began to focus on my own projects and work on my mental health. I started attending therapy regularly, and it was in those sessions that I was finally able to understand the weight I had carried for so many years. Little by little, I began to see things from a new perspective. I understood that family justice wasn't about waiting for others to do what I wanted, but about learning to put myself first. Although the emotional scars were still there, I started to heal and build a new life away from the shadows of betrayal. In 2021, after years of distance and reflection, I decided to take a step toward reconciliation, not with the intention of returning to the same family as before, but with the desire to heal the wounds. I approached my mother and explained that, although I couldn't forget what had happened, I was willing to move forward, with or without her. She, surprised but relieved, accepted my decision. My brother, although still distant, finally accepted that what we had lived through wasn't fair for any of. That's it for today. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Hit the bell to be the first to see our new videos. If you know someone who would enjoy this content, share it with them. And feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts, suggestions, or questions. I'd love to know what you think. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.